Welcome back. So, I just did the standings video. So, it is currently February the 7th as I'm recording this. Should still be February the 7th by the time I'm done because I don't think this video is going to take over 12 hours. But you never know. I have the gift of gab, don't I? So, I've left everything in the order that it is as of February 7th. So, this is before Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays games. So, if it's inaccurate to the current standings, I apologize. Although, what I'm looking at here is not necessarily dependent on the standings right now. What would I do as a general manager at the deadline? And I feel like there's varying levels of buying that goes on. So let's just go ahead and move these down a bit. And so then there's the question of who should be all in, right? So who should be all in at this trade deadline? So I'm going to make a column where teams are all in. Florida absolutely deserves to be all in. They should be all in. They're going for back-to-back Stanley Cups. No reason not to be all in. Toronto has already basically stated that they're going to be all in at the deadline. So understandable. The last season of Marner's and Tavares' contracts, you kind of have to go all in. Tampa Bay's where it gets a little bit difficult. So let me go ahead and pull these down. Just think of it as like a really boring Bob Ross painting. Just think of it that way. So, and again, this is my suggestion. I would say Tampa should be buyers at the deadline, but not all in. That's my honest opinion. Meaning, don't be selling off a bunch of prospects and draft picks going for it this year. This may very well not be the year. Washington absolutely should go all in. Washington, I don't know what kind of mojo they got going that's made them as good as they are. I watch their games. I watch every game because it's part and parcel of this job. And I can't figure it out half the time. There are plenty of nights where Washington wins and I think to myself, now how did they do that? And sometimes it's goalie theft. Sometimes it's just timely goals in the last 5 minutes of a game. And sometimes it's just playing Washington hockey, which can be a tough watch at times if it's shot suppression. But yeah, I think Washington, all in. Yep. Carolina, I think is going to be all in because they've got Mikko Rantanen, but they don't have him signed to an extension. And I'm going to say this here because at the time it goes live on the channel, it's during the break. I think they made a mistake with the Rantanen deal right now. Rantanen has not fit in as seamlessly as Natchez did. So when that trade went down, there were plenty of people who said Mikko Rantanen relies on Nathan MacKinnon for his goals. And without Nathan MacKinnon, he's going to have a harder time of it. Right now in Carolina, maybe that's what we're starting to see signs of. And maybe Natchez has been really good in Colorado again as I'm recording this February 7th because he's playing with MacKinnon. MacKinnon makes everybody look better. So this is why when people are like, well, Cale Makar has better numbers when he's with MacKinnon than when he's not. Who doesn't? Who wouldn't? And if you find a guy who fits in really well, it doesn't mean he's bad. It's sort of it's the Anson Carter argument with Vancouver, where Anson Carter was great with the Sedins. He was only there for the 1 year. It didn't mean that Carter was necessarily a superstar. Just he had that chemistry. It fit. It clicked. So I don't insult somebody because they play well just with one player better than they do when they're not with that player. New Jersey buyers. Sure. Yep, buyers for them. I'm going to need to put in a sellers part of this. So, and I'll drop Winnipeg. Sure. So, depending on now, when I was a card collector, that was considered lucky. If you dropped a pack of cards on the floor, that's your pack of cards. You pick that up and open that right away because that's going to have a Sergei Fedorov rookie. And it's going to be that Upper Deck French rookie, too. All right, so actually, I'll put Stan Pat, which was Pat Quinn's nickname in Vancouver until he made a couple of big trades. His nickname was Stan Pat. And then sellers. Because there's only 4 things you can be, right, at the deadline. So, all right, Winnipeg there. I'll move Boston down. Ottawa. Buyers? I think you kind of have to be. You have to send the message to that locker room that you believe in them. Not all in. You're not, giving away the future in order to try to win one right now, but buyers, which is where Detroit should be too. Detroit should be buyers at the deadline. And just let the players, let the fans, let everybody know we believe that we're going to be a playoff team. For Boston, I know they're looking at adding, but personally, I prefer if they just stand pat for right now. This is a team that I don't think additions are necessarily going to work, but it's always labeled as negativity. I don't want to be negative, but I feel like if Boston trades another first round draft pick, I might weep openly in videos, multiple videos, over giving away another first round. And I know this year's draft class is not great, but every time I hear that, we then look back at that draft class 5 years later and we go, you know what? There were still some good players in it. You don't like that's the thing that's weird. Well, I don't think we're going to get a star player. Okay, and you're still getting good young players. There's no the 1990 and 2000 draft classes were not great, but outside of that, draft classes always have star players in them. So, Boston, I'd prefer if they stand pat. Columbus, honestly, I'd like to see them have the gumption to buy at the deadline. I would. I would love to see them buyers at the deadline. They have the cap space to do it. So even if they don't make the playoffs this year, you're sending a message to your fans and to that locker room. A, we believe in the group we have, and B, we are not going to just, keep going through this cycle of not being a playoff team. That is not acceptable. Send that message. And then stamp it and send that message to Patrick Laine's house too. And then I'm kind of kidding. So then we get to the Islanders. I'm going to say the Islanders stand pat, and I'm going to say that I agree with it when they do. Because, yeah, I think they're going to stand pat. So this isn't going to be in order once I get down here. This is where I remind people I don't have a script, so I don't plan all this out in advance. I'm just like, hey, well, I've got all 32 magnets on the board. Why not? So, the Islanders, I think, will stand pat, and I think that's the right move for them because even though they've had a really good hot streak lately and maybe they can get into the playoffs, mortgaging the future is not really something that I think would make a lot of sense for them. The Rangers, I think the Rangers as buyers at the deadline makes sense because this is a team that should at the very least be above the playoff line. They've added Miller, which means they're not selling. And I'm just going to say, too, I don't know how long it's going to take for Canuck fans to start saying, wow, thanks for Hedl. Hedl may not be JT Miller, but he's still been pretty good in Vancouver. But the Rangers are clearly in a buying position. I think they will be buying. Pittsburgh had better be sellers. Pittsburgh had better be sellers, right? This is the year. And the one thing with this is that Dubas wants young players and draft picks. He'd prefer if they're close to NHL ready. He doesn't want to just like full on sell everybody off, and that's the correct move to make. Montreal, stand pat. They don't need to add anything. They've already got a lot of good young players. And I'd prefer they didn't sell Jake Evans. But if they did, Jake Evans is going to attract a lot of interest. That's the thing. If you're Kent Hughes right now, you've got to be looking at the way Jake Evans is playing and say he's playing the best hockey of his career. We can pay him for that now, or while he's playing the best hockey of his career, we could trade the player, and then we'd be free to sign him as a free agent on July the 1st if we get there. The trick being that when you trade a player with the idea that we're going to bring him back, they don't always come back. They don't always come back. Philadelphia, they are sellers. So it would seem silly for me to do anything else. Buffalo's interesting because, I mean, we know that in all likelihood Dylan Cousins probably gets moved, although what they're asking for is right now something that teams aren't willing to part with. But yeah, Buffalo will be sellers. I don't know if Cousins is going to go anywhere. They want somebody of similar stature, of age, basically a player they can plug into their lineup. They don't want futures. They don't need futures. Buffalo has so many young players and draft picks. They don't need that. So Buffalo's in an interesting position. A team that's nowhere near a playoff spot. At the time I'm recording this, they're 12 points out of the playoffs, and yet probably not looking to sell off everything at this point in time. Winnipeg. Winnipeg has kind of got to go all in. If Winnipeg wins the West, and then they crash out in the first round, it's not going to mean anything. It'll mean something to Winnipeg fans, but everybody else will just point and go, and there they are again. The Winnipeg Jets are not a playoff team. And, like, as in, they make the playoffs, but they don't win in the playoffs. So that's something that the Winnipeg Jets are going to have to try to head off, and I think they go all in. Dallas, I'd rather Dallas didn't go all in. I'll say buyers, though, because obviously they're going to be. With Sagan on the shelf, with Heiskanen on the shelf, they have cap space to add, and then hope those players are back by the time we reach said playoffs. But yeah, Dallas is kind of in tough right now. The expectations are pretty high for them. Minnesota, considering all the injuries and everything going on, and then the salary cap's going to go through the roof, just stand pat. This is the last year that they're penalized greatly for the Parise and Suter buyouts. So they already had a lot of cap space. Really, Shadow, you had to land right in the dish? And you're not going to clean that up? All right, you're not going to clean that up. So, Minnesota. Yeah, I'll clean that up. I will. Rabbit's going to be really happy, though, because now her food is everywhere, so she can go through and pick out all the little bits she wants. Minnesota, basically, when you have a rabbit, it's a bunch of pellets, and then all the food they actually want to eat is hidden under the pellets. So, there you go. So, Minnesota, I think stand pat makes the most sense, and then just go for it this coming summer. They could build a pretty formidable roster next summer. So, they could be fun to watch. Edmonton, you got to go all in if you're Edmonton. So, the teams that I'm saying all in, these are the ones to keep an eye on, I think, going into the deadline, because even though Carolina's already made a big move, I don't think they're done. I don't think Carolina's done. And the Oilers, they want to go back to the Stanley Cup final, and they want to win it this year. So, it's important to do that. It's Vegas. Vegas is going to go all in. Vegas doesn't have any cap space right now. I look forward to seeing how they create said cap space. They're ruthless. They'll do whatever they got to do. And I admire that and fear that at the same time. So Vegas, I think, is going to be all in. I think it's probably the right move because these players aren't getting any younger, and their window to win another Stanley Cup is not going to get opened any wider unless I guess they could get really ruthless this summer if things don't work out. It's Vegas. LA. I'll say buyers. Like buyers, but not crazy going out there and trying to, win a Stanley Cup right now. But buyers definitely. There's some weaknesses on that roster they could shore up at the deadline. But yeah, LA's there. Colorado, I'm going to say not going all in for Colorado. And I know there's going to be Abs fans who might say, well, they have to go all in. The Abs are an interesting team. It doesn't feel to me right now like they're trending closer to said Stanley Cup than farther away. The standings video I just did, they're 7-1 over the last month. It's not great. So, yeah, the Colorado Avalanche, I think, buyers. Vancouver, they're going to be buyers. But I think Stan Pat makes... Okay, so as a Canucks fan, do I want them to buy at the deadline? I don't want them to part with more draft picks. I don't. I don't want them to part with young players and prospects either, necessarily. Their track record when they do that has not been fantastic. Put it that way. So, for Vancouver, they're not sellers. But if I say Stan Pat, people are going to be mad at me, aren't they? Because it's going to be like, yeah, you got to sell Pettersson. Pettersson's not going anywhere. Pettersson's staying at least until the end of this season. Maybe he gets traded before his no trade kicks in July the 1st. But I think he's here for at least the rest of this season. So, I'll say buyers. But I'm hoping it's not like crazy levels of buying. Azrael wants to get in through the door that I've got closed there. But if I let her in, she's going to be able to get right back out. She just doesn't like closed doors. So, we get into the teams below the playoff line in the West. Calgary. Stand pat. They've already done their adding. They've already added Farabee and Frost. I don't think they need to add a lot else. Maybe you added a defenseman or something. But you with Calgary coming into this season, we expected some sort of a retool or a rebuild. You don't want to jeopardize that to try to, eke into a playoff spot and then get knocked out in the first round. That doesn't help anything, right? So you have to have that long-term plan in place. St. Louis... I think Doug Armstrong wants to get back in the hunt, but ultimately I think St. Louis is better off being a seller at the deadline. personally. And again, this is what I think is the best plan for teams going forward. Utah, stand pat. Go into that locker room and tell the team, I have faith in you guys. If you make the playoffs, great. If you don't, we're going to maintain this plan going forward. So Utah, I think standing pat makes the most sense. Anaheim, same thing. Stand pat. You don't need to really add much of anything. Maybe if you can add a little bit of veteran presence up front, fine. So if you add a team's, let's say a bad contract from another team, and they want to make a move at the deadline, maybe they don't have any cap space like Vegas, this kind of thing. Maybe you add somebody, you get them to retain a little bit of money, and you add a veteran, and you try to keep them in your lineup, that kind of thing. But outside of that, I think you stand pat. Seattle should sell. Seattle should sell. I will be curious to see what happens with Brandon Tanev. I think Tanev would draw a lot of interest. Yanni Gourde would have, but Yanni Gourde's hurt. So now Yanni Gourde's not going to attract nearly as much interest at the deadline. Tanev becomes the most likely one to draw them a return. And I would say that if the Toronto Maple Leafs could pick up Brandon Tanev and have the Tanev brothers playing together, that'd be great. I wanted that in Vancouver for years. I would enjoy seeing the Tanev brothers playing together. Nashville, sell. I know that Nashville's plans for this coming summer include potentially adding via free agency. We'll see how all that works. I think Nashville needs to consider not necessarily a full rebuild, but some sort of retool. But we'll see what they do. And then you've got the last two, and I'm going to put them both under selling because we know that Chicago and San Jose, any expiring contract on these two teams is going to be looked at by opposing squads that are looking to add at the deadline. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that I think could go all in. Telling you how many teams I think are in the running potentially for the Stanley Cup. And then buyers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 17 teams I've got as buyers are going all in. So that's more teams than are currently in the playoffs because I've got the Rangers and Columbus in there. And then one team above the playoff line that I say they don't need to add, and that's Minnesota. But I think they probably will. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that I think should stand pat, maybe minor changes. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that I view as sellers. So that's a quarter of the NHL. And keep in mind, too, that after the trade deadline, the teams that have sold off, their records just absolutely drop through the floor. And it makes their overall numbers really bad. And it ends up making it look a lot worse than what it necessarily was during the season. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.